nicely together. Thank you so much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Hare Krishna. Thank you. So nice to be here. Thank you very much. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaridhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaridhari Yashoda Nandana Prajajana Ranjana Yashoda Nandana Prajajana Ranjana Jamuna Tiram Vanachari Jamuna Tiram Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaridhari Yasoda Nandana Brajajana Ranjana Yasoda Nandana Brajajana Ranjana Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jamuna Tiram Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gaur Premanandi. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayam Udirayet Nasta Prayeshvabhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtiki. This morning we're reading from chapter 16 of the 6th canto, King Chitraketu Meets the Lord. And we're going to read a number of verses because we're covering the entire speech of the Lord to King Chitraketu. It's a total of 16 or 17 verses. So it's kind of like a condensed Bhagavad Gita we're going to get this morning. So before we start reading these translations, which are rather elaborate, and I'm hoping we can take turns reading, just want to take a moment and reflect on King Chitraketu's journey to this point where he's meeting Krishna personally, or we could say Krishna's first expansion as Baladev. When King Chitraketu began his spiritual journey, he had other interests in mind, didn't he? What were his interests? He wanted a son. Yes, he was approaching these sages who could have given him spiritual knowledge for the blessing of a son instead. So they warned him, this will give you joy and distress. And he said, all right, maybe you'll be a teenager someday, I'll take it. And so then he suffered much more distress than he was bargaining for. But that distress led him to this point of spiritual realization. He lost his son. Of course, we all know the story. But then his son, when he was so distraught, the sages said, what do you want us to do? Do you want us to bring your son back? And he said, yes, please. So he brought the son back. And the son didn't recognize them. It's kind of like when, if you're parents and you drop your kid off at the elementary school, or at the junior high school, but yeah. So, Dad, would you drop me a block away, please? I don't. So they said, son, you're back. And he said, who are you? He said, we're your loving parents. Don't you recognize us? And then what did he say? Which parents are you? Yes, I've had so many parents. Which ones are you? So all of this was quite humbling for King Chitraketu and enlightening at the same time. And so this led him to the point of coming to pursue his spiritual life instead of his economic or his family development as a first priority. That was his very difficult road to enlightenment. Something I think we can all relate to, that there have been distresses and traumas in our lives that have led us to turn to God in some way or another. And so that is one of the reasons Krishna lists Chatur Vidha Bhajanti Mam Jana Sukritino Arjuna. The Sukriti, the pious, turn to him because of wisdom, curiosity, but often distress or financial difficulty. So King Chitraketu has taken this circuitous path, but it has brought him to this point where he's getting personal darshan of the Lord. Now, why is it that he's meeting Anantasesha and not Krishna personally? Can anyone say? Adi Guru. Yes, Lord Balaram and Lord Nityananda. So that's all right, but don't we meet Krishna through the Guru? Okay. Well, he's attracted to that form. I was going more with Narottam Prabhu's point that you see, Krishna is very busy with his devotees who are already past all of these ancillary desires. He's busy with them in the spiritual world. They're having a great time. And for everybody else, who takes care of them? Lord Balaram, right? Or his expansions, the spiritual masters. For example, who was great buddies with Duryodhana? All right. Who rescued Jagai and Madai and saved them from decapitation? Lord Nityananda, yes. See, so the Lord delegates everyone else to Balaram. So Chitraketu sort of in this category. He's not quite ready for the big time. I just wanted to share in terms of one distressful story. Could I just share with you? This devotee has this incredible journey of distress to bring him to Krishna. He and his brother were sons of a simple family in a village in India, in a small village in northern India, and they had this bright idea. This young man was like 4 or 5, and his brother was maybe 7 or 8. And they had this bright idea, let's steal some rupees from mom and dad, get on a train and go to Calcutta. So they did it. These 2 little boys, somehow, they managed to get on the train, and people saw them, I guess, and took care of them, and they ended up in the Calcutta railway station and with no idea where they were and no idea how to get back, no idea where they had come from. And of course, in America, their faces would be on milk cartons. Right? There'd be some Amber Alert. But at this time, there was just no way to connect. So somehow by Krishna's arrangement, there was a devotee in the train station, and he was talking with some of the orphans and asking, do you want to come to our school? Trying to give them shelter at the Gurukula in Mayapur. And so these boys went with him, and they entered the Gurukula, and they became staunch devotees. Meanwhile, their parents sold their little patch of land and began traveling all over India to every orphanage and everywhere they could possibly to try to find their sons. For years, 6, 7 years, they were searching and searching. You can imagine. And they came to Mayapur, and there were their boys. And they said to the younger boy, don't you recognize us? And what do you think he said? Which parents are you? You are hardcore. So fortunately the parents also became devotees. They were grateful. Their sons had gained shelter. So sometimes our paths are circuitous. This is the story of Chitraketu. But now this is the moment where he's finally meeting the Lord, the object of his attraction. And here he's offered prayers, or rather yesterday or the previous days, we're reading his prayers to the Lord. Now we're going to read the Lord's responses. So there's many verses, very philosophical verses. And one last thing before we start reading. Srimad Bhagavatam is considered this Amala Purana, the ideal Purana, because it is so consistent in its philosophy that it's so many different personalities are presenting the philosophy of Sanatana Dharma in the same consistent way, and therefore it is so spotless. So most of the concepts we're going to be reading and hearing about just now are familiar to almost everyone. And so I'm not going to go into those in any detail, but if you do come across one that you have a question about or are not familiar with, please bring it up and we can discuss. Is that all right? All right, so who'd like to start reading the translation, starting with verse number 49?
Shukadev Goswami continued, the Lord, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Anantadeva. Being very much pleased with prayers offered by Chitraketu, the king of the Vidyaharas replied to him as follows: O best of the Kuru dynasty, Maharaj Parikshit.
The Supreme Personality of Godhead, Anantadev, replied as follows: O king, as a result of your having accepted the instructions spoken about me by the great sages Narada and Angira, you have become completely aware of transcendental knowledge. Because you are now educated in the spiritual science, you have seen me face to face. Therefore, you are now completely perfect.
All living entities, moving and non-moving, are my expansions and are separate from me. I am the supersoul of all living beings who exist because I manifest them. I am the form of transcendental vibrations like Omkara and Hare Krishna, Hare Rama, and I am the absolute, supreme absolute truth. These two forms of mine, namely the transcendental sound and the eternally blissful spiritual form of the deity, are my eternal forms. They are not material.
In this world of matter, which the conditioned soul accepts as consisting of enjoyable resources, the conditioned soul expands, thinking that he is the enjoyer of the material world. Similarly, the material world expands in the living entity as a source of enjoyment. In this way, they both expand, but because they are my energies, they are both pervaded by me. As the Supreme Lord, I am the cause of these effects, and one should know that both of them rest in me.
When a person is in deep sleep, he dreams and sees in himself many other objects, such as great mountains and rivers, or perhaps even the entire universe, although they are far away. Sometimes when one awakens from a dream, he sees that he is in a human form, lying in his bed in one place. Then he sees himself, in terms of various conditions, as belonging to a particular nationality, family, and so on. All the conditions of deep sleep, dreaming, and wakefulness are but energies of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. One should always remember the original creator of these conditions, the Supreme Lord, who is unaffected by them.
Know me to be the Supreme Brahman, the all-pervading Supersoul, through whom the sleeping living entity can understand his dreaming condition and his happiness beyond the activities of the material senses. That is to say, I am the cause of the activities of the sleeping living being.
If one's dreams during sleep are merely subject matters witnessed by the Supersoul, how can the living entity, who is different from the Supersoul, remember the activities of dreams? The experience of one person cannot be understood by another. Therefore, the knower of the facts, the living entity who inquires into the incidents manifested in dreams and wakefulness, is different from the circumstantial activities. That knowing factor is Brahman. In other words, the quality of knowing belongs to the living entities and to the Supreme Soul. Thus, the living entity can also experience the activities of dreams and wakefulness. In both stages, the knower is unchanged, but is qualitatively one with the Supreme Brahman.
When a living entity, thinking himself different from me, forgets his spiritual identity of qualitative oneness with me in eternity, knowledge, and bliss, his material conditional life begins. In other words, instead of identifying his interest with mine, he becomes interested in his bodily expansions like his wife, children, and material possessions. In this way, by the influence of his actions, one body comes from another, and after one death, another death takes place.
A human being can attain perfection in life by self-realization through the Vedic literature and its practical application. This is possible especially for a human being born in India, the land of piety. A man who obtains birth in such a convenient position but does not understand his self is unable to achieve the highest perfection, even if he is exalted to life in the higher planetary systems.
Remembering the great trouble found in the field of activities performed for fruitive results, and remembering how one receives the reverse of the results one desires, whether from material actions or from the fruit of activities, recommended in the Vedic literatures, an intelligent man should cease from the desire for fruitive actions, for by such endeavors one cannot achieve the ultimate goal of life. On the other hand, if one acts without desires for fruitive results, in other words, if one engages in devotional activities, he can achieve the highest goal of life with freedom from miserable conditions. Considering this, one should cease from material desires.
As husband and wife, a man and a woman plan together to attain happiness and decree unhappiness, working jointly in many ways, but because their activities are full of desires, these activities are never a source of happiness, and they never diminish desires. On the contrary, they are a cause of great unhappiness.
One should understand the activities of persons who are proud of the material experience, bringing only results contradictory to those such persons conceive while awake, sleeping, and deeply sleeping. One should further understand that the spirit soul, although very difficult for the materialist to perceive, is above all these conditions, and by the strength of one's discrimination, one should give up the desire for fruitive results in the present life and in the next. Thus, becoming experienced in transcendental knowledge, one should become my devotee.
Persons who try to reach the ultimate goal of life must expertly observe the Supreme Absolute Person and the living entity, who are one in quality in their relationship as part and whole. This is the ultimate understanding of life. There is no better truth than this.
O King, if you accept this conclusion of mine, being unattached to material enjoyment, adhering to me with great faith, and thus becoming proficient in and fully aware of knowledge and its practical application in life, you will achieve the highest perfection by attaining me.
Sri Sukdev Goswami continued. After thus instructing Chitraketu and assuring him of perfection in this way, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is the Supreme Spiritual Master, the Supreme Soul, Sankarshan, disappeared from that place as Chitraketu looked on.
Okay. Any particular points that we covered that anyone would like to discuss? We do have a designated verse, but we could. Yeah.
And there we are. Thank you for asking. There were 2 points that stood out to me. One was about how the deity is not material, just like the holy name is not material. It was one of the first verses.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering if you could touch on that for us, please.
Well, that happens to be the designated verse.
Oh, it is? Okay, well then,
Mystical.
I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with the format.
That's all right.
So, okay.
We always pick out one verse, so that was the one.
Okay, we'll leave it for the class.
All right. No, that's
Thank
good.
you.
That's fine. That's number 51. Verse number 51. All living entities, moving and non-moving, are my expansions and are separate from me. I am the supersoul of all living beings who exist because I manifest them. I am the form of the transcendental vibrations like Omkar and Hare Krishna, and I am the supreme absolute truth. These two forms of mine, namely the transcendental sound and the eternally blissful spiritual form of the deity, are my eternal forms. They are not material. Right? Okay, I'm going to read a little of the purport, and then we'll. Okay, so let's actually chant. Yes. Aham vai sarva bhutani bhutatma bhutabhavana shabda brahma param brahma amobhe sashvati tanu aham vai sarva bhutani Bhutatma bhutabhavanaha Shabda Brahma Param Brahma Mamobhe Shashvati Tanu. Please chant. Aham Bhai Sarva Bhutani Atma Bhuta Bhavanaham Brahma Atma Bhuta Bhavanaha the Brahma Param Brahma Namoti Shashvati Tanu Aham Bhai Sarva Bhutani Bhutatma Bhuta Bhavanaham Shabda Brahma Param Dharma Amobhe Shashvati Tanu Hamsai Sarva Bhutani Bhutatma Bhuta Bhavanaham Shabda Brahma Param Brahma Mamobhe Shashvati Tanu. Good. Synonyms together, please. I, Vi, indeed, Sarva Bhutani, expanded in different forms of living entities. Bhutatma, the super soul of all living entities, the supreme director and enjoyer of them. Bhuta Bhavana, the cause for the manifestation of all living entities. Shabda Brahma, the transcendental sound vibration, the Hare Krishna mantra. Param Brahma, the supreme absolute truth. Mama, my, Ubhe, both, namely the form of sound and the form of spiritual identity. Shashvati, eternal. Tanu, two bodies. And translation together. Yeah. All living entities, moving and non-moving, are my expansions and are separate from me. I am the super soul of all living entities because I manifest them. I am the form of the transcendental vibration, like Omkar. And I am the supreme absolute truth. These two forms of mine, namely the transcendental sound and eternally blissful spiritual form of the deity, are my eternal forms. They are not material. Report. The science of devotional service has been instructed by Narada and Angira to Chitraketu. Now, because of Chitraketu's devotional service, he has seen the Supreme Personality of Godhead. By performing devotional service, one advances step by step, and when one is on the platform of love of Godhead, Prema Pumarta Mahan, he sees the Supreme Lord at every moment. As stated in Bhagavad Gita, when one engages in devotional service 24 hours a day, Tesham Satati Yuktanam Bhajatam Priti Purvakam, in accordance with the instructions of the spiritual master, his devotional service becomes more and more pleasing. Then the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is within the core of everyone's heart, speaks to the devotee. Dadami Buddhi Yogam Tam Jaina Mamupayanti Te. Chitraketu Maharaj was first instructed by his gurus, Angira and Narada, and now, having followed their instructions, he has come to the stage of seeing the Supreme Lord face to face. Therefore, the Lord is now instructing him on the essence of knowledge. The essence of knowledge is that there are two kinds of vastu, or substances. One is real, and the other, being illusory or temporary, is sometimes called non-factual. One must consider these two kinds of existence. The real tattva, or truth, consists of Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan, as stated in the first canto, second chapter, verse 11 of Srimad Bhagavatam. Vedanti tat, tattva vidas, tattvam yajnanam advayam, Brahmeti paramatmeti bhagavaniti shabdyate. Learned transcendentalists who know the absolute truth call this non-dual substance Brahman, Paramatma, or Bhagavan. The absolute truth exists eternally in three features. Therefore, Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan combined are the substance. The categories of emanations from the non-substance are two: activities and forbidden activities, karma and vikarma. Karma refers to the pious life or material activities performed during the day, and the mental activities of dreams at night. These are more or less desired activities. Vikarma, however, refers to illusory activities, which are something like the will-o'-the-wisp. They are activities that have no meaning. For example, modern scientists imagine that life can be produced from chemical combinations, and they are very busy trying to prove this in laboratories throughout the world, although no one in history has been able to produce the substance of life from material combination. Such activities are called vikarma. So the deity reference is actually Prabhupada's embellishment of this translation, which he does often and rightfully for our understanding. What the verse is referring to primarily are how Krishna is present in everything, and he manifests the living entities as his expansions. So we all have heard about, perhaps even personally experienced teachings of our godhood. That if we just get it together, we will realize that we were God all along. And of course, this is a very attractive marketing approach, right? It's very, very attractive. You have so much unrealized potential. Palm readers and mystics know this art. Whomever comes in their door, they will look at their palm and say, "Oh, you have so much unrealized potential." And the poor customer, they, "Oh yes, finally somebody has understood me," because we all are feeling somewhat unfulfilled. Yeah? So to say you are God plays off of this universal experience. As Giriraj Maharaj wrote, "If to become God is your ambition, why should God help his own competition?" The idea of becoming God implies a sort of competitive approach to spirituality. That if I get in and work hard and follow the rules and keep my nose clean, I too can be on the altar one day. So this idea of spiritual advancement, taking us to this unimaginably high position, again, it can attract people, but it is unreal, because that's just not our position. And here, as in Bhagavad Gita and in so many other places in Srimad Bhagavatam, Krishna is making this point to Maharaj Chitraketu. Your happiness lies not in achieving some sort of imaginary exaltation of yourself, but rather in realizing your actual position. There you'll find the happiness. It's counterintuitive, because material life means always putting ourselves on top, right? Srila Prabhupada went to Japan to have his books printed, and met with the executives of this big printing company, Dai Nippon. And so all the senior executives came together to negotiate the contract. I just got to tell the story because it's such a great story. He was with Tamal Krishna Maharaj, and they were talking to print the Krishna book in huge quantities. And Dai Nippon had offered $1 a book. And Tamal Krishna Maharaj said, "Okay, so we want to offer you 50 cents a book." And all the officers were very shaken, saying, "Swamiji, we cannot possibly do that." And then Prabhupada entered the discussion as the mediator. So in this way, they expertly negotiated the price down to 70 or 80 cents or something like that. And everybody left. Okay, everyone was satisfied. And all the senior executives, they bowed and left, and then the junior executive was left with Prabhupada. So when Prabhupada was with these people, whether it was a newspaper reporter in Philadelphia or whomever he was with, he didn't see them according to their status or their job or their position. He saw them as spirit souls. So here was this junior executive, and Prabhupada saw him as a spirit soul, and he said, "So what is your goal in life?" And so the junior executive looked at the stack of cards that all the other executives had left. He pulled his out of the stack and put it on top. "That is my goal in life. I want to run this place. I want to be in charge." There's another charming little story about Prabhupada seeing everyone as spirit souls. The devotees in the Los Angeles temple had just purchased the church on Watsika Avenue. And Prabhupada was taking all the devotees through the different rooms, and they were looking at each room. So the minister of the church happened to be there, and he came up to Srila Prabhupada and said, "You have so many nice disciples." And Prabhupada said, "You can be one too." This vision of spirituality comes from knowledge. It begins with knowledge. In any pursuit, we begin by becoming aware of that which we do not know. There is unconscious incompetence. We don't even know what we don't know. Then there is conscious competence. Okay. Conscious incompetence. Oh, I am now understanding that I'm a spirit soul, but I don't know what that looks like. Okay. Conscious incompetence. And over time, we progress to conscious competence. All right, I want to behave as a devotee. I offer my obeisances, I avoid offenses, I chant my rounds, I follow the regulative principles, even though it may not be on the spontaneous platform of love. I still do these things because I can do them if I focus on them. This is conscious competence. Then finally, the stage of unconscious competence, where automatically and spontaneously we serve Krishna because we have awakened that dormant position in our heart. Nityasiddha Krishna Prema Sadhu Kabunoi, Shravanade Sudhi Chite, Karya Udoy. Lord Chaitanya said that loving Krishna is natural, it's dormant in everybody's heart. So it's a matter of staying the course till we can come to these realizations. But Krishna is explaining to King, or rather, Sankarshan is explaining to King Chitraketu how this is possible. First of all, the knowledge is there, and then he becomes accessible through these two forms, the holy name and the deity. These are eternal forms, he explains, but they are present and accessible even to those in the stage of conscious competence. So the question of material becoming spiritual is raised in many places in Bhagavatam. One of the notable places is in the latter part of the 10th canto, where Maharaj Parikshit asks Shukadeva Goswami, if sound is material, how can God be present in sound? God, who is purely spiritual, can he be present in sound, which is material? So Shukadeva Goswami responds by citing a previous instance where the same question was asked. That is by the personified Vedas, whether it was answered by them. So in that description, we understand that if material things are used spiritually, they become spiritual. Brahmarpanam Brahmahavir Brahmagna Brahmata Hutam. That in the performance of sacrifice, everything becomes spiritualized. Therefore, the eternal reality of our experience exists in sacrifice. When we recognize that we are already performing sacrifices, just sending them in the wrong direction, when we redirect, that's when the doors to spiritual life open. When we sacrifice for Krishna instead of for things such as a son or for a kingdom or whatever we might aspire for, when we actually, from the core of our heart, think, I just want to please Krishna, that's all that matters. That's all that matters. Anything else, that's secondary, but I just want to please Krishna. That means we have returned to our eternal spiritual position. So how do we come to that? Through these forms that Krishna has kindly made available to us. The sound vibration, which is easily accessible to everybody. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. As Lord Chaitanya said, Nam Nam Akari Bahuda Nija Sarva Shaktis. I have invested, Krishna, you have invested all of your energies in these holy names. And there's no hard and fast rules for chanting them, any time, any place. However, Durdaivam Idrishami Hajjani Nanaraga, expressing the position of the conscious competent, he says, I have no taste for them. How unfortunate am I? And secondly, the deity form. So the deity form is just, of Radha Kalachandji is so amazing and overwhelming. Such a powerful experience for the senses. You know, when you think about going into, I was in Kerala last year in South India, and it's a very beautiful part of India and very different than northern India, where I have always visited before. People are quite cordial, mellow, and a little less passionate. Is that a fair assumption? I don't want to offend anybody. I have heard from Indian nationals that is the case, that there's a gulf of difference. But anyway, the point is that Kerala is also a heavily Christian part of India. And so near where I was staying, there was a big, beautiful Christian church. It was a gorgeous building and very impressive. And it had been there in different iterations for over 100 years. And so on a japa walk, my wife and I thought, it'd be nice to, let's go take a look. So we went in and we were peeking in the windows, looking, and it was a Catholic church, and she was raised in a Catholic church. And she said, that looks very familiar. There were pews with no cushions on them, rather austere. And as we were looking here and there, a gentleman came up and said, go on in, go on in. So we went in. He showed us the open door. We went in and looked around, and sure enough, that's pretty much what it was. It was pews and a pulpit. And there was a couple of statues, Mary and Jesus, but no shringar, no decorations, and maybe a little vase of flowers at the bottom. It was very austere and dry. So this process of worshiping the deity assaults our senses, doesn't it? When we see how beautiful the deity is, when we see how much bhakti has gone into every facet of their presence, the flowers, the clothes, the backdrops, the altar, everything just expresses, this is the highest expression of love I can offer. In this way, bhakti just emanates. And it's worse than COVID. It's more contagious. It's infectious. So the deity to the mundane person would seem like a beautiful statue or a beautiful display. But to the devotee, Premanjita Charita Bhakti Vilochanena, we see the devotion behind, we feel the devotion, and we are arrested and stopped, and our attention is captured because we recognize that there is a sacrifice that goes beyond just sacrificing for ourselves. And when we sacrifice for Krishna, obviously this could not be done out of out of employment. It can only be done out of joy. Even if somebody's maintained in a simple way to do it, it is just a manifestation of love. Similarly, chanting, when we're advanced, it goes beyond just the knowledge of the holy name. We put our whole heart into every mantra. And that's when we're getting to the threshold of unconscious competence, where every time we chant, our attention is automatically focused, and all the other things, past, present, and future, that might occupy our mind are just kind of pushed away. It's nothing but the name, nothing but the name. Whether I'm feeling this way or that way, it doesn't matter. There's nothing but the name. That is how transcendence becomes manifested in sound. That is how we realize our relationship with our Creator, which is one in substance but different in quantity. And that potentiality that is dormant in us all becomes manifest when we get back in our proper relationship. So the deity and the holy name make that possible. What do you think, Prabhu?
It's so sublime and it's so satisfying to hear that. However, I'm here to throw some assault at you.
So before we get to that, could we hear from Nanda Kumar? I think he was going to say something much sweeter.
Of course, certainly.
It was about the overall question I thought of when you read all the 10, 11 verses. Lord started with a statement that you are now perfect because you are seeing me, you have realized the spiritual knowledge, so you are perfect now. At the last verse, Lord says, you will achieve perfection. So whether he's perfect or not, so it's confusing.
Oh, more assault. I was trying to get away from that. From the frying pan into the fire. First he says, now you're seeing me and this is, you are now perfect. And then at the end he says, if you follow these things, you will become perfect. So which is it? Right. O king, if you accept this conclusion of mine, being unattached to material enjoyment, adhering to me with great faith, and thus becoming proficient and fully aware of knowledge and its practical application in life, you will achieve the highest perfection by attaining me. So the perfection is when we see Krishna, but that perfection is not sustained without our continued effort. This is the difference between personalism and impersonalism. That to the impersonalist, there is a sense of accomplishment. Now I have become God, or I've seen the oneness of everything. I became one with the universe. And people who pursue that kind of experience tend to memorize the dates and the times where they had it. I was on a mountain and it was dawn and all of a sudden I realized my oneness with everything. It was June 14th, 2020. You know? So they're always remembering that moment of godhood and trying to get back to it. But for devotees, there is an opportunity for darshan with Krishna, which can make an impression, a lasting impression, but then it's up to the devotee to continue building on that impression, not looking back. You see? Like, what's an example you can think of from the first canto? Narada Muni. Narada Muni had darshan of Krishna after his very difficult sojourn. And what did Krishna say? Practically the first thing he said is, I regret to tell you that you will not be seeing me again in this lifetime. But if you continue in your service, then you will always be with me. And so that's exactly what he did, and that's exactly what happened. You see, so the perfection is there, but it's not finished. That's you see, we like everything to be done, and it's like our spiritual weekend, and we can just go home and relax, you know. But the challenge of devotional service is that we have to, as it says biblically, you have to pick up your cross every day. I guess you could say you have to pick up your beads every day. Right? You have to do the chanting. You have to every day reinvest your energy in service to Krishna. In the early days, sometimes devotees would say, Prabhu, I'm really busy. Could you chant 4 rounds for me? As the old hymn says, you got to walk that lonesome valley. You got to walk it by yourself. Ain't nobody else can walk it for you. You got to walk it by yourself. So in our spiritual lives, the perfection is an ongoing and not a one-time experience. I hope that. Okay. Yes, Prabhu.
Excuse me. I'll try to make this as sweet as possible. And there's a number of people that I've come in contact with over the years, but one of them who really stands out as far as deities is a businessman from here in Dallas. Now, he passed away not too long ago. His name is Trammell Crow. So Trammell Crow, about, I would say at least 30% of all the commercial property in Dallas is owned, or was owned by him. His daughter comes here and eats in the restaurant. She's a vegetarian. And her son helps us sometimes with like our Rath Yatra now in the downtown area. But he was instrumental in letting us collect money, sell paintings in his office buildings to build this temple.
Wow.
Now, his hobby was to collect ancient deities. Most of the buildings that he owns here in Dallas has an exhibit of a deity ranging from anywhere from 500, even I've seen some of his collection that's 5,000 years old.
What kind of deity?
He collects both Chinese and Indian, but most of them are deities of Lord Vishnu, like Ranganath, and you know, ones that we're familiar with, large sculptures of Lord Shiva, and so many varieties. Okay, many varieties. All right, and he has a personal collection also that's world famous. Of deities. So I spoke with him I worked in his buildings on time, and he actually started a museum downtown Dallas, the Trammell Crow Museum of Asian Art, and which to me pales in comparison to this temple, but you know, the name made it famous. But here's the point that I wanted to ask about was, you know, in the verse we see how spirit is defined in terms of its eternal existence, and matter is temporary. And it's captioned in the verse. So, for example, if you go and you see the deities in his collection, like the one that's standing out to me, it's a 5,000-year-old deity of Lord Vishnu. So it's like from the wall to about here. But the deity looks, so it's so ancient, but it looks like the stone, volcanic stone, that the stone has become so porous and almost unidentifiable unless somebody had seen like these South Indian deities. You could recognize it, but so it seems, and from just a strictly empirical perspective, that the deities matter, that the deity is perishing, the deity is not eternal. So many people will come here and we're explaining, look at the bhakti, and obviously, right, it's just mind-blowing. But at the same time, there's always that apprehension to an intellectual that these people are worshiping a stone, right? They use that, it's a British caption that the Indians are stone worshippers. They specifically talk about Shalagram Shilas, Govardhan Shilas, but even the deities. So what would your rebuttal to that be?
Right. It is the bhakti that is eternal and not the stone. And Krishna is appearing in a form which is appropriate for our blunt material senses out of his mercy. And that mercy is endless. That is transcendental to this ephemeral world. Yes.
Expound as the eternal energy of the Supreme.
Yeah.
But Prabhupada sometimes uses these examples that everything is God's energy. So why don't you accept a deity as God?
That was for the Arya Samajis, or isn't it? Arya Samajis. Yes, they who would say God is everywhere. Why go to the temple? To which Prabhupada would say, well, God's everywhere. He's in the temple too. Why not go to the temple?
But thank you for clarifying that. So the consciousness is our claim to eternality.
Right. In the material world, the Lord appears in ways in which we can access him. Another example is given here is the Paramatma. Paramatma is an expansion of Krishna, only in the material world, though. There's no planet of the Paramatma. There's no specific personality per se. It is Krishna appearing in a means which is accessible to us.
There was. You want to go ahead?
Sure. I think
I wanted to throw something.
You've thrown quite a bit out there, Mr. Very interesting about Mr. Crow. Are there other questions or topics anyone would like to explore?
I've got a thought, Prabhu. You mentioned that you can't pay someone to do this kind of work. And yet, this is a topic that's coming up more and more, is paying devotees to do devotional service. Mm-hmm. Can you just help clarify some misunderstandings here?
Yeah, it is a sensitive topic because we are interested in the bhakti. There are professional priests at various Hindu temples and other temples who mechanically do their puja seva, but the spirit of devotion is not the same. Most of the seva for Radha Kalachandi is done by volunteers. And they are devotees who have their economic life established in such a way so that they can do it. They can give time and volunteer. And yet there's so much seva to do that there is need for others to practically give full time. So what is the economic condition of those people? Should they be just left to their own devices, or should they be provided something so they can maintain themselves? So money and religion are they are
an interesting combination. In the second chapter of the first canto, Sutta Goswami says, Dharmasya hyapavargasya narta utai upakalpate. Prabhupada cited this as a very important verse from Srimad Bhagavatam, that spirituality should never be performed for economic development. Now that applies in this case, obviously somebody's needing economic support for their service, but in a much broader sense, people perform religious duties because they want economic return. They pray for, I mean, it's very crass in the contemporary Judeo-Christian tradition, which is why so many people have become disgusted with it. You know, if you're right with the Lord, you get money, and if you don't have money, it means you're not right with the Lord. Right? So in the very broad sense, people have tied religion to economic development, when in fact they're quite different. So that verse goes on to say, if in the course of your spiritual life you do develop economically, just that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. You don't have to say, I'm not touching money. But if you get money and you use it for sense gratification, that's wrong. So this is the point. So some devotees are very rich, some devotees are very poor. And it has nothing to do with the neither extreme has anything to do with the quality of their devotion. So in the just a little social studies here in terms of ISKCON. In the very early days of ISKCON, we were all volunteers. Prabhupada said in Los Angeles there should be no salaries. He was providing housing, he was providing meals, even for householders. He said, why should there be salaries? But as their families grew, then Prabhupada further said, okay, if you're going to be married, you have to be prepared to support a family. Cannot be dependent on the temple if you're going into that phase of family life. So most of us were quite unprepared for that. And hence we were selling buildings at Trammell Crow's, selling paintings at Trammell Crow's, right? As office buildings, yeah. So it has been a long, arduous journey to get to this point where we understand that we need some religious professionals and they need to be provided for. And that is a standard in this part of the world. In India, it's different because families tend to own the temples. Right? The temple becomes a family concern. It's the family business. Right? And this is why when Gorkishore Das Babaji left his body, people were fighting over it because he was such a renowned sadhu. They thought, okay, this will be a real good addition to our temple income. And Bhaktisiddhanta had to stop it by his requiring purity for anyone who took the body. So the point is that our temples are owned in a community sense, in a collegial sense, in a non-profit sense, that we are not, this is not the sole proprietorship of any one family or individual. Right? So as a result, they have to be run in a more judicious way so that people can be supported and allowed to fully give their bhakti. The test will be, so we've matured as an organization to this point, where most of the congregation is financially independent and some will be financially dependent and to be able to serve the community full time. So the two tests will be whether the community can value the devotion sufficiently to support financially, and whether those who are being supported financially do not use their revenue for sense gratification. That will make the whole thing collapse. That was Prabhupada's fear when he said no salaries, right? That it would just become an organization where we make money and pay people well, and then they get lazy and lose sight of the mission. So it's very clear to me we need religious professionals to grow our movement. We can't do it just on the basis of volunteers. The Mormon Church is an example of an all-volunteer religious organization that has been very successful. However, they have done it by making business a core principle. And if you know, with all due respect, if you really study the philosophy, it's not very deep. So it is sort of more of a material purpose for coming together, celebrating God, and then making money. It's a good American church. So So our tradition doesn't accommodate that. Our tradition has great value on renunciation. And renunciates who can be respected and supported within that framework, then we're really establishing varnashram. People who are renunciates, even if they're householders, but they don't want to grow a family, they just want to serve full time. People like that can be supported. Okay, that's my 2 cents on it. It's not definitive, but just from my perspective, having lived this life of a quasi-religious professional in ISKCON. Yes, next. What's our time? One more question, is that right?
So one of the verses mentioned that when we have a desire, we receive the opposite. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is speaking about that. Now I feel that, and yet also in the world it seems sometimes people are having their desires fulfilled in a material sense.
Yes.
And we also describe the Supreme Personality of Godhead as someone who fulfills our desires. So I was wondering if you could clarify that.
Right. Yes, we see. This question was also raised, interestingly, by Maharaj Parikshit in his conversation with Shukadev Goswami in relation to Lord Shiva. He said that Shiva himself appears to be very renounced, and yet his followers appear very opulent. Whereas Vishnu is very opulent, but his followers appear to be impoverished. So why is this? So he tells the whole story of Bhrigu Muni in response to that. But we see amongst ourselves, amongst our communities, like some people are very well off economically, some people are not. Why is Krishna doing this? Why doesn't Krishna just kind of make a blanket deal? You surrender to me, I'll take care of you. Well, he says that. But how, he doesn't say how he's going to take care of you. and just as Chitraketu Maharaj went through all of this material turmoil to come to the point of prioritizing spiritual life, so we may also have to do that. You see? There's nowhere in the Gita where Krishna promises an easy material life if we surrender. All he promises is that he will take care of us. So that may mean that we have a manageable material life, and so we can give our bhakti freely. It may mean that we have some very heavy karma or some heavy tests from Krishna that really draw out our devotion. If it doesn't hit us emotionally, it's not going to change us. If the tests that Krishna gives us don't hit us really hard, then why should we bother changing it? Why should we? What is the lesson, you see? So when we go through difficult times, we know, okay, Krishna is helping me in this particular way, whether it's economic difficulty, social, emotional, familial, social. So devotees are a little indifferent to difficulties, just as devotees are a little bit indifferent to material success. One of my good friends is an heir to a huge fortune, and he said that so people who don't have money hope that money can make them happy. And people who they hope that money isn't what makes you happy. If you don't have money, you hope that's the case. If you have money, you know it's not the case. What is that? Yes, money made me happy. Oh, let me get more money. Yes. Right. So I hope that answers your question, that the trajectory of each of us is individual, our relationship with Krishna is individual, and we're so very narrow-minded thinking this lifetime is so very important, when in fact it's just one of a countless string of lifetimes. So one way or the other, if we give this life to Krishna, that's what's important. One way or another. However it manifests in our individual case will be unpredictable. So, is that all right?
I was wondering specifically on the point he said that whatever we desire, we receive the opposite.
Uh-huh.
I think I just have never heard that before, but it seems true, and also sometimes our senses aren't perfect. We might see something different in the world.
We want something, but we receive the opposite. Yes. Well, in a broad sense, we want pleasure and joy and security in this world, and we can't get it. We get little bits of it here and there, but ultimately it's all a house of cards. So we want the one thing, and we go for it, and then we end up getting the opposite. So the point is, if we want Krishna, well, we get the opposite. We want Krishna, well, that's because it's not a material desire. That is the dormant natural desire of us all. If we want Krishna, though, we may not get material enjoyment. And so that is the test. Okay? If we approach Krishna with material desires, then Krishna may very kindly give us a little test to see which is more important to us, him or the material desires. That's like Maharaj Chitraketu. So he wanted the joy of his son, he got the distress of his son. This is why the Lord is telling him this. But for devotees, no. There's no such there's no such injunction for devotees. If we want to serve Krishna, we'll get Krishna service. Okay? I hope that.
Jai. Yes, thank you.
Last. Okay. Okay. Next.
Thank you, Prabhu, for beautiful class. So my question, I think you covered some of the part, but you mentioned devotees are indifferent to difficulties, and we see from Mother Kunti prayers also, she's asking for more and more. So I want to understand, when in a devotee life